Hi, this is Dark Journalist. Today I have a special report for you on the 50th anniversary of the JFK assassination. Now, President Kennedy was killed under suspicious circumstances, and for reasons that remain obscure to this day, the government and the media covered it up. But there was one man who put elements of the CIA on trial. His name was Jim Garrison, and he was the district attorney of New Orleans, where Lee Harvey Oswald spent the summer in 1963. Now, Garrison's story, though celebrated in the blockbuster film JFK, may have been lost to us, but veteran TV personality John Barber poured his time and resources into a fascinating documentary called The Garrison Tapes. The film was hindered from the start by outside influences that didn't want it to see the light of day. Now, with director John Barber's help, we will revisit this landmark effort and show you clips of Jim Garrison's heroic battle to find the truth in the assassination of President Kennedy. Here we go. JFK, the Lost Jim Garrison documentary.
John Kennedy was killed by a major force. The simplest way to describe it is a Central Intelligence Agency. Lee Harvey Oswald killed no one at all. So the point is, it wasn't a question of being alone or with anybody. He had nothing to do with the assassination. To answer it more fully, one of the functions of the Warren Commission was to conceal the fact that Lee Oswald was not involved, to conceal the fact that he was not involved in any way, and to make it appear as if he were involved.
Now, John, I wanted to start off with how it all began. How did you meet Jim Garrison?
Well, I met, strangely enough, Daniel, I started out as a stand-up comic.
Right.
And my mentor was Red Fox, and this was long before Red Fox became the star of Sanford and Son. By the way, that's his real name, John Sanford. But he was brilliant, and I was the first one to ever book him on a variety show when I got my first variety show. But he had a comment that I thought was brilliant, and the comment was, "Heroes ain't born, they're cornered." Well, I'm not a hero, but I was sort of cornered into my meeting or my first introduction to Jim Garrison. I originated the original AM Los Angeles show in 1969-70. It was the precursor to what became Good Morning America, and after I left, that's where Regis Philbin ended up. But in any event, because I did a lot of topical and political material, I read everything that I could as a comic. So when I ended up auditioning for this show, I guess the producers were stunned that I knew so much about the news, and I got the job. And immediately, the show became unbelievably successful. I put people on the air that nobody would book. I mean, the government was trying to put Muhammad Ali in prison. I booked him for an hour. I mean, I put terrific people on the air. Anyway, I always believed the Warren Report. I mean, why would I doubt what the government would say?
Right.
But I'm not stupid. The reason I'm not stupid is because I didn't go to school very long. I was a dropout when I was 15 and educated on the street. So I had sort of street smarts or street sense. And when Garrison arrested Clay Shaw, he announced publicly that he had solved the crime. I mean, we ran the news clip. But everybody began to attack him. The media began to attack him. The federal government began to attack him. They said he was power hungry and he was a maniac, and the government released his psychiatric files from when he was in the military. They did everything to destroy him.
Wow.
After a year of this, Daniel, I said to myself and a few of my friends, if Garrison has nothing, why doesn't the government just get out of his way and let him go in there and fall on his face?
Right.
In any event, As you know, after 2 years, he finally got Clay Shaw to trial. Clay Shaw was acquitted, even though when the jury was polled, they felt he was involved with the conspiracy, but there wasn't enough evidence to convict him.
Okay.
And in the subsequent documentary I made, you find that Diamond, a fellow named Diamond, who was Clay Shaw's attorney, tried to introduce the Warren report as evidence, and in a 3-judge panel discarded that as hearsay.
That's great.
That is something you never hear of in the United States. But in any event, the trial's over, and I'm in a bookstore one day, and I see this book called Heritage of Stone. And it says by Jim Garrison. I thought, oh my, is that the same Jim Garrison? So I picked it up in the bookstore and started to read it. I stood there for an hour. I couldn't put the book down. I was stunned at what I read.
That's his account of the trial, isn't it?
Yeah, that was his recounting of the Clay Shaw trial. That's all it was. But I was staggered by the information and the facts.
Right.
It was unbelievable to me that he had to sue Time Life Corporation and take them to the Supreme Court to have the Supreme Court rule in favor of Garrison's being able to subpoena the Zapruder film for the trial. And also Dr. Zink was not allowed to help participate in the autopsy because he was pulled away by generals and admirals.
Yeah.
It was staggering. So I bought the book and I read it that night. The very next morning, Daniel, I went into the office. I called information in New Orleans. And I said, could I please have the district attorney's office? They gave me the number and I called, and a female voice didn't answer. A deep bass baritone answered the phone and said hello. And I said, hello, can I speak to Mr. Garrison, please? And the voice said, speaking. And I said, Mr. Garrison, my name's John Barber. I'm calling from Los Angeles, and I just read Heritage of Stone. And Daniel, right away, he said, oh, you must be the other one. I only sold 2 copies.
That's great.
So I said to him, I have this morning show. It's highest rated news show in Los Angeles. And we do it live. It's 90 minutes long, and we open up the phones for people to call in. And unlike the shows that you see now that are call-in shows, whether they're radio call-in shows or whether they're television call-in shows, all of these shows today, nobody gets to speak for more than 18 seconds, and then they're off the air.
Right.
Because usually the hosts are using these people as straight people. If somebody had something interesting to say on my show when they called in, they were on for as long as they were interesting. In some cases, it was a half an hour. But in any event, I said, I want to book you on the show. And he said, John, you'll never get away with it.
Aha.
I said, Mr. Garrison, we have just won an Emmy. We're doing really good. Governor Reagan's running for a second term. He's going to come on this show rather than the Today Show. You must do it. I'll interview you for about 45 minutes, and we'll open up the phones because everybody would want to talk to you. And he said, John, you will not get away with it. And I said, Mr. Garrison, we'll take that chance. Okay, so we booked him for about a week or 10 days later. We got to made the hotel reservations and everything. The following week, I was fired, and Jim Garrison was canceled.
Now, let's go to this clip, which is Garrison describing how the media attacked him.
I was burned so many times that I stopped giving interviews. In other words, if the words ended up in print, they were twisted in indescribable fashion. If they were for TV, repeatedly the editing resulted in an absurdity. So I reached the point where I concluded it would be almost useless to try and communicate my position, and I was tired of being harassed.
Okay, so you have this popular show, and then they remove you as a kind of punishment for booking Garrison. and you ended up at NBC with a different news show.
Tom Brokaw suggested that I be hired by NBC. I auditioned at NBC and I got the job, and I was there for 5 years. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I never signed a contract with them because if I signed a contract, they would have owned the material. Anyway, I end up there. I win 3 Emmys and a Golden Mike while I'm there. Watergate happens, and I pick up the phone and I call Mr. Garrison. And we chat about Watergate, and he mentioned some of the names that came up with Dallas.
Right, so there's a crossover there between the personnel in the JFK assassination and the Watergate cast of characters.
That's right. And then with the business of Vietnam, since he had been in the military, I thought, well, I'm going to chat with Jim about this. So we became like phone pals, but never met. So in 1979, I create the first reality show, which was a show called Real People.
Oh, yeah,
and
I remember the show. It was great.
Thank you very much. In any event, the executive producer, owner of the show, a fellow by the name of George Slaughter, had this contract with NBC to do a show called City versus Country. It was city humor and city music versus country music, country humor. Anyway, he knew that ABC had turned down my first pilot. And Slaughter said, do your show here. Within a year, a show that started out near the bottom, it was a monumental hit. In some areas of the country, it got a 50 share. And anyway,
Terrific.
in any event, when somebody gets a successful show in television, the networks are always running to them to do another show. And even though Slaughter was really not that creatively involved in the first 3 years of the show, they came to Slaughter with an idea to do a live news show that was sort of entertaining. And I guess they got the idea from watching Patty Chayefsky's Network with Peter Finch. I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it.
Oh, yeah, that's a great movie, yeah.
Oh, it was when I reviewed it, I said it's the only movie in the history of Hollywood that you go to listen to.
Yeah.
It has the most brilliant dialogue ever written, and to this day, Daniel, that movie becomes more important. I mean, if you Google Ned Beatty's speech about money, it is more important today than it was in 1977 when the movie came out.
Absolutely.
Anyway, they gave him this show called Speak Up America. So George had asked me to help him with the show. And I said, hey, George, I'm not writing it. I'm up to my neck 20 hours a day doing Real People. I can't be helping you with this. So I'm going through the paper one day, and on page 13, I come across this little story. And it said the House Select Committee on Assassination has concluded 4 shots had been fired in Dealey Plaza because a fellow named Mac had discovered a dictabelt worn by a motorcycle officer that had been accidentally left open when the shots were fired, and they recorded more than 4 shots, so they had no choice but to conclude that there had been assassination, that Lee Harvey Oswald could have never fired those shots in that time then. So immediately I called Jim. I'm thrilled. And he gets on the phone, and I said, Jim, Mr. Garrison, I never called him Jim. Mr. Garrison, do you feel vindicated? Daniel, he says, John, I feel like a blind man who's gotten a small trophy in a very dark room. Only I know I got it. I said, well, you must feel vindicated. I said, you'll be all over the news. I mean, Cronkite and Huntley and Brinkley and Reynolds and all these people will be calling you. And he said, John, you're the only phone call I've gotten about this.
Unbelievable.
And I said, you're kidding. I said, you gave a lot of stuff to the House Select Committee. And he said, yes, indeed, I did. He said, they even wanted to subpoena me to testify. And I said, don't send the subpoena because I'm not going to show up. And they said, why? I said, because when I subpoenaed the government in my trial, they never showed up. They just tore up the subpoenas. So
That's right.
he never did testify. And I said, well, you know what? I'm going to tell you a story. I'm coming to New Orleans to shoot some stories for real people. And I'm going to come and I'm going to put you on camera. And he said, John, you know, in the 10 years since the trial, I've never talked to anyone. I said, I know. He said, but I'll be happy to talk to you.
Wow.
So I went to New Orleans. I put him on camera for over 3 hours. And I must tell you, Daniel, it was the most terrifying, stimulating 3 hours I had ever spent in my whole life.
Here's another clip from the Garrison tapes.
If they can't remove you, and they do assassinate in the United States, and they've been doing it for years, and I'm sure they still do, because there's no reason for them to change their policies. Now they've been continually successful. If they can't kill you, they concentrate on discreditation.
So what was your first face-to-face meeting with Garrison like?
I almost never met anyone brighter than Jim Garrison, anyone more well-read than Jim Garrison, and I've never met anyone with a more caustic, Mark Twainish sense of humor. I've met 3 totally brilliant people in my life. One was a scientist named Buckminster Fuller, the other was Jim, and the third is my son, who's got like a 5,000-year-old soul. So anyway, I come back, and there's so much material, it's going to be a 2-parter.
Okay.
So in the first part, we open up, and I had Marjorie Gartner doing the interview. We open up with this close-up of Garrison leaning forward in his very sincere, deep voice saying, Lee Harvey Oswald had nothing to do with the assassination. As a matter of fact, he wasn't even on the 6th floor. And, I mean, audiences were totally spellbound because they'd never heard in prime time this kind of comment about the Warren Report.
Right.
So everybody was waiting for part 2. Now, when we did the interview, I asked him how many shooters he felt there were. And he said it was probably triangulation with 3 shooters. And he said 3 teams of 2, one to fire the rifle and one to dismantle and pick up the shells. And he said maybe even teams of 3 in case they needed radio personnel.
Okay.
And then I to him, how many people do you think actively knew that Kennedy was going to be the target? So he's a former lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, and he was calculating around, it's got to be on a need-to-know basis, and he said about 32 actively would know. So I said, wow, that's interesting. And a lot of them were still around. Now, when he had his trial, you know, he says in the documentary that the killing of a president was not a federal crime. So a lot of the people that he wanted to subpoena, and he gave me dozens of names, people who had been arrested at Dealey Plaza, the three tramps, identified the tramps, and the people he wanted, especially a guy named Fred Chrisman, who he felt might have been one of the shooters. But Chrisman in another state, and nobody would extradite him for the trial. So he had a very, very, very difficult time. Anyway, part 2 comes up. Now here's the point. People in this business, when they hit it big in television, they make an obscene amount of money, and I was making an awful lot of money at the time.
Good. And
the show was #1, and justifiably so. Anyway, I had bought this small bungalow in Toluca Lake, which was about a block and a half from Bob Hope's house, right next to a golf course, a little tiny house. So I had it torn down. I hired an architect to build this really huge sort of Swiss kind of chalet made out of cedar, red brick, and skylights. So that's where I was putting my money for my family, and I moved into a little rental house while this was being built. Anyway, part 2, is coming up. My wife and I are sitting at home with our son watching the story.
Uh-huh.
And up comes the story, which I had edited. And here is Marjo Gortner sort of looking at Jim slightly off camera and saying, how many shooters do you think there were? And up comes Garrison's face, and he says, about 32.
Unbelievable.
And then the phone rings, and it's George Slaughter. And he says, what do you think? And I started screaming at him.
Yeah.
What did you do? What did you do? What did you do? And he said, Jim Garrison is a nut. I says, no, you're the nut. You've deliberately libeled that man. He could own you and he could own NBC. And we had this horrible fight on the phone, and I hung up. I immediately called Garrison, and it's like midnight in New Orleans, and I'm crying. And I said, Mr. Garrison, I don't know what happened. And they re-edited at midnight last night, and they didn't tell me what they were doing. And he said, John, I'm used to it. I said, then you must sue them. You must sue them. They have deliberately libeled you. And that is slander when it's deliberate, and I will back you up. And he said, John, my family loves your show. All I want you to do is send me a couple of Real People t-shirts. I am so used to this, and that's why I haven't talked to anybody for 10 years. So please, don't feel bad. I mean, I'm telling you, Daniel, he could have owned NBC.
Well, it sounds like they definitely had it in for him. I'm just surprised they were so blatant about it. So then what happened to you as a result of all this?
Slaughter badmouthed me. The industry got really nervous about me. So I had a difficult time, as you can well imagine, in the business. But as a sidebar, I was going to say, in the documentary, you will see the crimes committed by NBC. NBC hired an FBI informant by the name of Walter Sheridan to go to New Orleans to get the key witness, a cab driver named Perry, he worked for an insurance company at that time, who said under oath that he was with Oswald and Clay Shaw and David Ferry when they were planning the assassination in New Orleans.
That's Perry Russo.
And Walter Sheridan was trying to get him out of New Orleans to California to go to work for an insurance company at $50,000 a year. Well, Garrison was smart, because Perry came to him and said, I'm meeting with these guys from NBC who are going to make this documentary. So Garrison wired him. And here you have Walter Sheridan from NBC interfering with this murder trial of the President of the United States.
Wow.
Well, of course, Garrison charged Sheridan with a felony. And it never went to court because the federal government stepped in. But at the time, there was in the United States in broadcasting something called the Fairness Doctrine. When I interviewed Reagan on my show, he's a Republican. Next week, I got to interview a Democrat. And if there's a socialist who can get 5% of the vote, I got to interview a socialist. Or if there's a Nazi or a flat earther or anybody who can get 5% of the popular vote, if you put somebody on the air, you've got to give them equal time. NBC had no choice but to give Jim Garrison a half an hour of late-night television to explain his case. You can never see that in America today. I mean, the frauds that have been perpetrated in this country, first of all, from the killing of John Kennedy to the murder of Martin Luther King, probably by the FBI, to the murder of Robert Kennedy. I was personal friends with Thomas Noguchi, who was a coroner who performed the autopsy on Robert Kennedy. And you can see that autopsy report if you Google it. He said that the gun that killed Robert Kennedy was more than 2 inches from the back of his skull because of the extensive powder burns. Sirhan wasn't closer than 6 feet with his arm extended.
Right, so the evidence doesn't match there.
Sirhan did not fire the fatal shot, so City Council in L.A. was trying to get rid of Thomas Noguchi, so I became the co-chair of the committee to retain Noguchi as an independent coroner. The opposition was led by Frank Sinatra, and Frank Sinatra and I were the closest of friends since I wrote Laughing, because I used to write all this special material. That was, unfortunately, the last time he ever spoke to me, because I was fighting to keep Noguchi, and they eventually got rid of Noguchi.
Okay, so this clip is Garrison outlining the unusual aspects of the Kennedy motorcade as it headed into Dealey Plaza.
The newspapers in Dallas showed the route of the motorcade as it came out Main, continuing through the extension of Main, going in the middle of that big pasture they call Dealey Plaza. On Thursday evening, at the 11th hour, the route was changed by the administration of Mayor Earl Cabell. The route was changed to turn right on Houston and then left on Elm, not only going by the ambush nest where the waiting rifles were, but also going by the building in which they had pre-located the Patsy. And the indications are 3 teams at the minimum, with two teams shooting from the grassy knoll, that's 4 men, and at least 1 team in the back, although not on the 6th floor at that window. They could not have been going any faster as they passed the depository, as they passed through the target zone of 11 or 12 miles an hour, which is virtually stationary if you have rifles and professionals waiting for you.
So what was Garrison's conclusion, like when he talked to you about the whole case, in a nutshell? How did he describe it to you?
In a nutshell, he said the CIA murdered him. They did that so that they could proceed with their war in Vietnam, because John Kennedy, we had 12,000 what we called advisors there at the time. And in October, which was a month before the assassination, John Kennedy was interviewed at his compound in Hyannisport by Walter Cronkite. You can Google that interview, and he says that war is not ours to fight. That war is the Vietnamese to fight. We will supply aid to them, but we will not supply the men to them. And he said he was going to withdraw 1,000 troops a month for a year. At the end of the year, there'd be no more Americans in Vietnam. He was killed on Friday, and on Sunday, Lyndon Johnson sent 50,000 troops to Vietnam.
Yeah.
Now, you know, the military and the government can't do anything well in 2 days. They had to be preparing that move into Vietnam for a long, long, long time.